Right, ladies and gentlemen, can I bring you to order, please? Could I ask you kindly to seat yourselves down and prepare yourselves for the brief summary from our three panel moderators. So I'd like to just very briefly introduce the panel here next to me. So, summarising the first session, Challenges for Enforcing Product Safety in the Digital Era, we have Maija Laurila from the European Commission. Summarising our second session, Problematic Consumer Markets and the Way Forward, Making More Effective Enforcement and Redress, we have Freeman from the UK. And finally, for the third session, Consumer Confidence and Empowerment, we have Carina Törnblom from the European Commission. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor here to Maija, please, to give your summary.
Okay, so my session, my safety session was very rich in content, and of course, like all the other sessions, we had way too little time to actually talk about it all. So I tried to summarize, I think, with 4 points. One is, we started again to discuss how much responsibility, role can be actually put on the consumer's own awareness and behavior. So this is, of course, something that we've heard much about the consumer role, but can we expect the consumer to accept and understand that there is no sheriff in this town? That's a slogan of one of the authorities used in actually trying to make the consumers aware of it's not possible to check every product that comes from a third country that may have different legislation to Europe if the consumer makes a direct transaction with the web shop outside of their known jurisdictions, outside the European area. But can the consumer accept this message, and how to make the message more acceptable to the consumer? So that's also where the question of behavioral knowledge, behavioral science and economics also came into question. So that's what I think we all have to keep working on. The second point is that one of the speakers, the excellent speakers on my panel, made the point that actually the value of the transactions consumers are making online is getting lower, which means that consumers are more routinely buying also products that are cheap, not only the big purchases where they actually really want to compare prices, but also very cheap products, and they don't mind if they are not that great quality, then they can buy a new product of the same kind later. It doesn't matter because the price was not high. But so what does it actually mean then that these transactions get more routine? It means that the authorities have even more work to do and more consumer education maybe to do. So what can the authorities check online? They can easily check if the products have some safety information, safety warnings, maybe even some user instructions, but does it stop there? Can the authorities actually get their hands on the product? That's the one big question. And if they can't, how can they enforce then the rules that would apply in Europe about safety? So they can ask the economic operators maybe some photos, maybe they get the golden sample if they ask for the product to be tested. So can they then trust this information, or can they ask for assistance from another authority in another country? That was actually the important new area that came into discussion. And the mystery shopping possibility, or the anonymous shopping that was already highlighted by some of the previous speakers. So there are ways, but it requires much more intelligent and much more clever and new ways of working. Then there are the questions of totally new kinds of economic operators. We've also heard about that, the fulfillment centers and the freight forwarders, all those. Now, there was an interesting example from the Netherlands where we learned that actually in a different area, not in this authority's enforcement work, but in the telecom area, there was a fulfillment center that had been contacted, and actually was very happy to cooperate with the authority, even though there were some sanctions discussed, because then they were happy that they had their role clarified, because this is one of the challenges that authorities across Europe have now identified as a possible gap to know what is the role in the legal setting framework of the EU, what are these fulfillment houses. So at least in the Netherlands, this fulfillment center has accepted a certain role, and I think we will be happy to know more from the Dutch colleagues then of this specific case. It didn't lead to any court decision because it was done amicably, but I think this is what we have to really look into if we can broaden this experience. Then one nice way of presenting the work that's now done on the internet surveillance was the Dutch slogan of the enforcers staying on top of it by making internet smaller, defining the responsibilities of the different actors, like those fulfillment houses, and then filtering the economic operators who need to be controlled more, and then applying both proactive and reactive surveillance. So this was also the French experience of what works well. So there is already a lot of knowledge, but it now has to be collected. So that's why there is a project coordinated by the European Commission about preparing guidelines that would really set out the interpretation, the common interpretation as much as possible of the procedures, processes, the roles and responsibilities of different players in the chain, and then highlighting if there are perceived legal gaps. That's not confirmed yet, but this is something that the project has to cover. And then what recommendations could be given to different players in this chain. Of course, we are talking about guidelines, not legislation in this project, so that's only recommendations. Okay, now you all know that there is a legislative process also ongoing, so if there are true legal gaps, it's not too late to address those either. So, really the summary is there is a lot of knowledge, it has to be collected, and it's time then to put it all into practice so that consumers would feel they are equally safe in online shopping as they are in the traditional chain. Thank you very much.
I'll stand here because I've got some slides and there's a zapper here. So these are the questions that we considered. So the topic was about all of these. It was to consider the challenges of new online business models and where are there problematic sectors or markets. What are the key challenges, the best practices for enforcement, and in particular to think about where perhaps enforcers' powers may be less than adequate to deal with some of the problems, and what more can we do to make sure consumers obtain redress when things go wrong. And the discussion, I think, focused particularly on issues of what does the law mean, is it clear enough and can it be adjusted in some way. The powers, clearly, do we have the right powers, but importantly also our attitude in using both the law and our powers. And a theme which came up again was the willingness of enforcers to cooperate with consumer associations and with each other. And also, I suppose, the willingness of businesses to hardwire compliance in their business operating systems rather than being told to do things. And of course, all the best businesses do want to hardwire compliance in their business practices. So we thought about those things. Now, whoops. So these are, apologies you can't see the slide, but problem areas tend to focus in online markets on these areas, and they're all intermediaries, and it seems the role of the intermediary is a problem, partly because the definitions which relate to their area of responsibility are not necessarily clear, or there is disagreement about what level of responsibility they should take. So search engines, app platforms, social media, there are classic discussions about, well, how much responsibility should they take for what you as the user see, and what happens when things go wrong. peer-to-peer sites, group buying sites, online marketplace platforms. What happens when the deal that you think you've got is not the deal that in fact you've got, or when something else goes awry? None of this is particularly new, but it's reached a new focus with the sharing economy. We've been thinking about comparison tools, payment, delivery, technical issues, and pricing and data use. Now, it's fair to say we didn't discuss this in great detail in the session, but this is a slide I prepared earlier, just for your benefit. This was, using my amazing telepathic powers, I thought, well, what are the issues that we're going to talk about? And I thought, well, maybe these. And having done the slide, I thought, well, let's not waste it. So, a similar one, the sharing economy. Now, this slide is based on an internet sweep that we carried out as part of the SECIR common activity, where there was a micro sweep on the sharing economy. And given the discussion that there has been about, well, are there problems in the sharing economy or are there not? What should be done? I thought it was worth sharing this with you. These are the problems that we identified. In particular, you don't just have consumers on the sharing economy. You get businesses on the sharing economy who want to sell their wares by pretending to be a consumer. This is an old problem. It happened with second-hand car dealers many, many years ago. It's still a problem today. It is illegal, but it still goes on. You have platforms which require users to check for updates to the terms and conditions. They don't tell you of updates. They just say you've got to keep a lookout. Platforms with exclusive jurisdiction clauses. If there's a problem, you can't bring proceedings in your own state. It's got to be somewhere else. Platforms requiring arbitration rather than allowing you to go to court. Advanced payment issues. Loss of service fees if you cancel and you're unable to recover the full amount of your booking. And sometimes the amounts of money that you potentially lose we consider to be penalties. They're disproportionate to the amount of loss that anyone suffers. Those are some of the problems which exist in the sharing economy. So if consumers should be required to protect themselves against these things by just being vigilant and taking responsibility, I would disagree. Moving now to the things which we actually discussed. Enforcement challenges in the online market. Investigative powers and remedies not being sufficient to deal with online trade. It was particularly helpful to have a presentation from the European Commission on some thinking around what is likely to happen with the CPC powers. And I think there is a general acceptance now that CPC powers are not sufficient for the modern economy. Particular areas are those things which relate specifically to the online economy. So getting subscriber data from internet service providers, i.e. who owns this website. It's extremely difficult to find that out because there is a collision at the moment between our investigation powers and privacy protection laws. There is a collision, and until that collision is resolved, it will remain difficult to get subscriber data. It will remain difficult to find out who actually runs a website. Obtaining data from overseas businesses and the whole issue of international jurisdiction. Can we bring proceedings to protect overseas consumers? What happens if our consumers are affected by non-EU businesses? Then you've got covert interaction and test purchases. Again, this is an issue because of the collision between privacy rules and human rights and consumer investigation powers. To put the matter in context, if you want to investigate a dating website and the problem of fake profiles on dating websites, you probably need to set up your own profile on the dating website and purport to be a person who's looking for a date. You can imagine, can't you? You are going to receive private information from other subscribers to that website. And you're not allowed to get that unless you've got special, in the UK anyway, unless you've got special authorization, which is quite difficult to get. In some countries, consumer enforcers can't get this at all. So that means, think about it then, it means you cannot properly investigate dating websites. You have a similar issue with credit, insurance, anything which requires more than superficial engagement with the trader to find out what's really going on. Obtaining refunds for consumers, requiring traders to take sort of positive steps rather than cease and desist, taking down websites, holding platforms to account. We also discussed the issue of sanctions, the ability to sanction traders and to properly, well, to say name and shame is a bit emotive, but we want to make sure that people have the right incentives to comply, and putting somebody's reputation on the line is one way of doing that. And a further issue is mutual recognition of evidence, which is important in the online space because there are differences of view. If you, for example, as a non-British enforcer, say in a witness statement of some kind, this happened online, I believe in some jurisdictions that is acceptable. It's not acceptable in the UK. You have to have evidence of the website, of what was on the website, in a form which the trader can't easily dispute. If you send that to the UK, if you send your statement to the UK, we're not going to be able to help you because it isn't good enough evidence. And that is a problem. Unless we have some form of better recognition of evidence or a common standard for evidence collection, cross-border enforcement will remain difficult. Some issues around redress. These are some of the issues that we should think about in relation to redress. The legal framework, what industry remedies can and should exist. And again, we have this idea of hardwiring compliance into the way businesses conduct themselves. Clearly, if businesses set up effective redress systems, that's far better for everybody because it runs itself, as it were. Requiring traders to repay consumers is an area where there is a lack. What is the impact of the ADR directive, ODR regulation? What's the impact of that going to be? Private rights of action and collective actions, all of these are important topics for us to think about. And I think that's probably a fair enough summary of what we discussed. There were some particular areas of the law that people were interested in. Platform liability is probably the most significant issue which should be addressed. The interplay between the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive and the E-commerce Directive is the important thing to be resolved there. As I mentioned, extraterritoriality, the impact, the reach of European law, both to overseas traders and to overseas consumers. Issues around the Services Directive, what does it mean? Article 22 of the Services Directive, there's still issues about what actually does it mean, and of course all of the powers things which I've discussed in detail already. I hope that does justice as a summary, and apologies for the extra slides I snuck in. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stand here. Hands-free is probably better when you have notes all over the place. I've never chaired and been my own rapporteur at the same time, but I think now I will try to give justice to what we have experienced in the group. We were truly on a journey and a crash course in behavioral economics, and I must say, and I congratulate the presidency for having chosen well 3 speakers, and the speakers for giving such very good presentations so we could connect the dots for those of us who were there who are policymakers or enforcers in one way or another. So we started out with the basics from Kieran and the Joint Research Center about the fact that habits start at an early age, and bad habits in particular. So young people are very vulnerable, but also very perceptive to education. 2, we were talking about the aging population and the problems that we have there when we think we draw the conclusions from the aging population to what this can cause for consumer policy and consumer policy makers and the consumers in particular, what it can cause consumers. Because with age, your cognitive capacity goes down. At the same time, you think you're experienced. I'm probably in the risk group here. You think you're experienced, and you also have perhaps more money. I know it's different in Europe. In the eastern member states, it's not necessarily the same pattern for the aging population and what I described as in the Western Europe, if you really draw conclusions. But can you imagine you're experienced, you have a little bit more money than you had when you were younger, but your capacity to actually take decisions has, gone down a bit, and you're not aware? You're in a risk. But you're in risk of scams and also making purchases that you shouldn't have done, So there you are. Then we went on to Lisbeth Berg and her presentation from also many other, you are using, of course, other scientific proof, and you're extrapolating that and building on it, and it's very, very interesting findings also that you presented. You, for instance, you base yourself on the CADS, and I think many of you here in the room know that it means Consumer Attention Deficit Syndrome. This is something that exists for consumers, so we have to factor that in. Also, you said that decisions happen in attention mosaics, which means we all, as consumers, have to juggle. It's not that we are making decisions on one issue, only having to factor that in, but you are juggling a lot of things at the same time, which actually is very difficult. So information consumes attention in the first place when you receive it. Then also, if it happens and you're disrupted in your position when you take decisions, it doesn't help. And also, you added that consumer markets differ in nature and require different consumer competencies. And as human beings, we tend to specialize in the areas where we feel safe. So it means that we are maybe better at some things than others. And when we think we are better, I think that can cause problems, because we may apply this kind of skill in the wrong situation, in the wrong market, thinking that we know what we are doing. So I think we are surely challenged. We moved on and we familiarized, well, this I must have to say, because I was very intrigued. Lisbeth has made, there is a diagram that you should pay attention to when you receive the information from this conference, that really also shows that CADs are different in different markets and the patterns are different in different countries. So having that is fantastic. And I must say, being a bit shamefaced, being at least born in Sweden and Norway, we have high CADs. This is not good, especially in certain markets. And why is that? And this can be caused by having a life that is too good, not nurturing the skills to make calculation, thinking that you don't need, and not maybe being forced to calculate. And I took the example of the taxation system in Sweden, where you, in 2 seconds, just have to press the button on your mobile phone and your declaration of income is done because everything is pre-filled. It was different when I was young, I can tell you. So at least I can calculate, even APR by hand, okay? But I'm old school, so, But I realize I'm old school, okay? Then we went on to familiarize ourselves, and I think this is beautiful. It speaks for itself. We got to know Teddy Techno, Fairtrade FIA, Sally Sales, and Freddie Finance. And I must say, I think these names probably, these are the different types of consumers, and the ones with the high, the better knowledge, they manage in different situations better, but they have an opposite, which has a very high CAD in the same area. And much to my, and I don't think my commissioner would like to hear that, but, or maybe she would, because what will we do with us middle-aged women, you know? I say no more, and you can, I think you should study, follow more what Lisbeth has concluded. Finally, she introduced us, that's the summary to, I would call him Charlie, the consumer, if I may, because Charlie is this poor person that we all are, in fact, with all the question marks around us, where we are, depending on where we are, where we live, we have a CAD pattern, if you want, that distracts us from taking the right decision, and we have lack of time, poor numeracy skills, lack of economical thinking, or high purchasing powers, which is actually not good. If you have high purchasing powers, you're in the danger zone. So that was that. And then we came to something that was, for me also, we have now another consumer hero in our midst, and I think it's Päivi from the Finnish authority that keeps doing it. She is working on consumer competencies. She has a working group in her authority with people outside the authority. So for her to promote, and she's one of the few that has succeeded in promoting consumer education in school. So it closes the circle. And in that sense, working with others to give, using this kind of data to prove why it is important to start education and to to encourage young people to understand that they have to be smart, they have to be able to calculate to survive in life. It's one thing when you have money, but when you have less money, it can cause a disaster. So I think this is very heroic. We need to hear more about this, and maybe we need such groups in other countries to get consumer education more integrated in the curricula one way or another, and also for us to be able to best support at European level. Last but not least, I would like to say then that the conclusions that we drew together, I think, in this workshop is we do need all these facts, and especially as for us who here in the room work with the policy, whether we are consumer associations, policymakers, enforcers, we all need to have these facts. But we are in the pyramid of things and involvement of actual knowledge that Päivi put, I think we have not really reached the last stage where we can actually say that we fully understand and that we apply in everything we do in policy making. So we need to get to that level, and I think we need to get there together, and that is, I think, very important. From our side at the Commission, we are using this kind of data in these studies that you have heard about consumer vulnerabilities, because we need once and for all, in our modern society, things have moved on. Bonus pater familias doesn't exist anymore, or if he or she exists, because it can be a mother or some mater, but in any event, these people are long gone because they had time. We don't have time, and we need to design things better for consumers so they can benefit from all these markets that we are talking about. So let's do that. We are using the data very much in this study that will come this year on consumer vulnerabilities to see what exactly makes us vulnerable in different situations. And then we have those who maybe are vulnerable all the time. We all know that. But it's mainly about that we can be or we are not in certain situations. We also have learned, for instance, early findings in the digital single market study now for the first time give us the proof of how can I say, that the fact that people do not, and given the digital theme here also of this conference, people misunderstand what is a cross-border online purchase. So the reported statistics that we have officially are probably underestimating the cross-border trade that is ongoing, because if you have a website which is in your language, you already start assuming that it's a national website, which we all know in this room, this is not true. So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I look forward to working on all this with all of you. And to close what I would like to say, I would like really on behalf of the Commission to to thank all of you, not only for today and yesterday, but for all the work you do always. And also the presidency, because I must really congratulate you to putting this conference in such a fantastic environment, and also to put the themes so they can directly feed into our daily work, and also, as I hope, we can now take what we learned here, bring it to the Consumer Summit, and which is 1st and 2nd of June in Brussels. Consider yourselves invited. We really hope that you come, because the themes that we have to address in the summit, we can use all the things that we have gathered now from the presidency. So again, thank you warmly for everything. Okay, thanks.
Well, I think we can thank our panel members here for their excellent summaries of the different sessions. I hope for those of you, yeah, please do. I noticed quite a lot of people taking notes there as well, of course. Jason's slides, excluding the extra one you slipped in, will be uploaded later. Jason. Okay. So moving on, I'd just like to say a few brief words of summary myself now on behalf of the Latvian presidency and the organisers. I'll only take a few minutes of your time, and then I'll hand the floor over to Baiba for some closing comments as well. So, if you just bear with me for a few minutes, I just want to raise and reiterate a few points here. So, Obviously, in the last 2 days in the conference, we've covered a very wide range of issues. A number of people have noted, as we always do, that if there were more time, if there were more time. But since the purpose or aim of the conference was to bring up points of discussion on really relevant policy issues that can be brought forward and linked with the consumer conference that was just mentioned, I think time does exist to take these things forward beyond lunch and beyond the scope of just this conference. I'd like to pick up on a point that I'd like to quote a speaker from yesterday, actually. It's great to be a consumer in the 21st century. Sounds like a beautiful phrase to me. I liked it very much. I'm happy to be a consumer as an individual myself in the 21st century. There are lots of opportunities that didn't exist before in terms of choice and options. But we all know to balance that, there are also, on the other side, some issues too, aren't there? And ultimately, I suppose, if we want this well-functioning single market that serves consumers' interests, if we want consumers at the heart of policy and the economy, we want confident, well-informed consumers that enjoy the same rights in all member states, we need to really deal with these, let's say, obstacles that exist. The first one of these obstacles that's been highlighted here by many speakers and different interventions, of course, is the need for clear and really fit-for-purpose rules updated and suited to today's digital age and tomorrow's digital age. We've heard people talk about issues briefly touched upon like price discrimination, geo-blocking, safety, data security. But we've also heard about the new market trends these last 2 days. For example, areas such as comparison websites, social networks, and in-app purchasing. And we've heard also in the summaries here and before a range of solutions that different national authorities and others have put forward as ways perhaps of dealing with that. Secondly, about complete enforcement of the existing rules as well, of course. We've heard over the last 2 days about the issue of fragmentation, about how ultimately sometimes, for example, a product can be approved in one member state, but then unfortunately on different grounds be not approved in another. And third of these 3 areas perhaps that were brought up and have come up during the conference is about, of course, cooperation. Now, I'd say, if I can summarize, if you would all agree with me, not only does everyone recognize that there's obviously a need for deeper and wider cooperation, but there seems to be a very strong willingness for that to take place as well. And I think those two have to go together, don't they? It's not just that we need it, but we are willing to do it as well. But I think I could summarize that this cooperation perhaps needs to be in 2 ways. It needs to be deeper, so it needs to encompass, as many people have raised these points, consumer associations, national authorities, business associations, and of course the EU institutions. But on another level, let's be frank, this digital world is not European, it's global now, by its very definition. So any kind of cooperation that's not also widened, as many people have mentioned, encompassing third countries and international organizations, would be too narrow in scope. So let me go back to the aim that I stated at the beginning of the first part of the conference and again this morning. Apologies for the repetition here, but I find repetition is sometimes a useful tool. So the first aim was to share ideas and views on how we can enhance consumer protection policy in our digital era. And there was an eye, of course, on producing concrete value for the European Consumer Summit, which, if I remember correctly, is in early June in Brussels. I believe, and I hope for all of you as well, that have attended the conference, that actually these 2 aims have been met well in the last 2 days. There's been very active discussion. I've moderated some of it myself, of course. I hear from the other moderators that there was a very vibrant discussion in their rooms. If I can add in the safety room, it was a long one too. So obviously a lot of contributions there. So I'd hope for all of you that there's been a concrete value in these 2 days of the conference, and I hope it'll link well with the next steps that have been mentioned too. So with that in mind, before I hand the floor to Baiba here, I'd just like to make 2 practical points for all of you. Obviously the web stream here has been recording the conference. That, plus all the presentations from the conference, will be uploaded, and you will all be sent an email giving you the link to access all of those files. So as one practical point, you should expect that email by the end of next week. Presidency, please nod. Thank you. They nodded. End of next week, it's a promise, okay? And secondly, the questions that were tweeted and the questions that were written down that time didn't allow us to cover in one or two of the panel discussions. Remember, we will be summarizing those questions, we'll be uploading them as a file, and we'll be forwarding them to the relevant panel members. So anyone that's written down a question or tweeted a question that time didn't allow us to cover, please be reassured that your question will be passed on to the relevant panel members so that they are aware of your views and concerns. Okay? So, thank you very much for your time and attention these last 2 days, and I'd like to give the floor now to Baiba.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, everyone. At the end, I would like to very much thank you, everyone who came to Riga. I have heard that some of you have even been here just first time. I'm very glad for that. I hope that some of you also had possibility to see Riga a bit and something else of Latvia. But for those who were not able, I just invite you to come to Latvia in summertime, in July or August. We have wonderful beaches. We learned yesterday we have 460 kilometers of wonderful beaches. There are some places there is no one else except you. So that can really be fantastic holiday. So welcome everybody again in Latvia. So that was great pleasure for me to have you here. Enforcement agencies, which are my closest colleagues, consumer authorities, consumer associations, it's very good to have you here, business associations, and of course policymakers. I think it's important that we work together for consumers. I also would like to specially thank you, Commission people, coming here and doing this job. I know that's not easy to do this as well, moderate and report afterwards, but you did it great. Thank you very much for that, and I hope this will also help you to organize your Consumer Summit in June. I also would like to very much thank all our staff from the Ministry of Economy and Consumer Rights Protection Center. They are all around us for the work that we did, because I think for most of these people this was the first experience with international conference. So yeah, thank you from my side. And finally, I would like to also thank you to our moderator, David. Excellent job. I hope it was interesting for everyone. So have a nice trips home, those who are going back and those who are staying. I know there are people who are staying in Riga. Have a nice time in Riga. Thank you. And practical thing is that we have lunch. I think somewhere here. I'm not sure where, but I think there. So, yeah, bon appetit.